of legal considerations, security risks, and governance challenges. So the purpose of this presentation is to discuss how to securely use AI in your business. So that means, how do you evaluate AI tools? How do you remain compliant with legal requirements? And how do you ensure your data and reputation remain protected while benefiting from AI's capabilities? So I'd like to introduce you all to our two presenters. And these presenters, they've been having a conversation about AI long before ChatGPT became a household name. Polozie is a partner at Woods Gilman. She is the practice group leader for the Data Privacy and Data Security Group, and concentrates her practice on mergers and acquisitions, complex commercial transactions, data privacy, cybersecurity, AI governance, and venture capital transactions. She holds the CIPP credential, which stands for Certified Information Privacy Professional, and the AIGP credential, which stands for Artificial Intelligence Governance Professional. And we have Christian Foster, who is a cybersecurity architect at L&T Technology Solutions, and he supports SBC clients. And for those of you who don't know what BCISO stands for, Virtual Chief Information Security Officer. And he assists clients in navigating the evolving AI landscape, enhancing security, and maintaining compliance. He brings extensive experience in AI, cybersecurity, and emerging technologies, having advised Fortune 500 companies, startups, and government agencies. His previous roles include leadership positions at InfraGard, which is affiliated with the FBI, the City of Rochester, where he advised, EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, and the City of Rochester, where he advised on AI-driven transformation, risk mitigation, and regulatory compliance. So thank you both for joining us. So our first slide is AI in business. So when people hear AI in business, their first thought is probably Microsoft Copilot, ChatGPT, or similar chatbots. But AI is transforming businesses in other ways. I'd like to talk about current trends. So Kate, what do you see companies using?
Well, it's a good question, but I think what you started with is what we're seeing a lot of just everyone using, right? People are now more comfortable with ChatGPT, Copilot, note takers. They're using those individually and in business purposes. Companies may or may not be aware of. In addition, companies are buying AI products to help them in a number of areas, whether that's research or invoices or a number of different places where you're going to outside to buy a product that's an AI-generated product. And some of our clients are creating AI products, and they might be creating them in the field of healthcare or employment, or even just generating a simple bot to answer questions based on the data that they have in their system.
And Christian, how are you seeing businesses use AI?
Yeah, so the two questions that I get by far the most is generative AI for marketing and taking meeting notes. This is so true that I'm actually right in the middle of working with a client who is trying to figure out ways to capture sales data across the board. So they want to be able to do the stuff you might expect, like a Zoom or Teams meeting to transcribe notes, but also in person, which is causing some technical complications. But it's interesting.
So let's take a closer look at those widely used AI tools such as note takers, chatbots like ChatGPT, and other Gen AI applications. Christian, what are your concerns for companies that sign up for an AI tool without a plan in place, without an AI governance policy, or without consulting with an industry expert?
Yeah, so first and foremost is confidentiality. If you don't even look at the terms and conditions before you start doing stuff, you could be waiving rights you didn't even know you had, introducing all kinds of just risks that you're utterly blind to that can really cause some consequences down the line. To the point where you might need an expert like her to help afterwards.
And Kate, what are some legal concerns surrounding AI tools like note takers and chatbots?
Well, I think it's first starting with what you were saying, Christian, and digging just a little bit deeper. So AI terms and conditions, I sure you guys read these all the time, right? Not for you, I can't believe it. I actually write these for companies, and I sometimes say, you know, I can put something in there about giving away your firstborn, and nobody would ever know the difference. But you really do need to read these. And this is ChatGPT's terms and conditions. So when you've got that open and you're putting something into the prompt section, they're actually saying to you, right then and there, we can use your data to improve our services. That means we're using your data that you're inputting there for our training data, for our, you know, software. And there are horror stories that have occurred there because clients have used that to, for example, create code, and in doing that with their proprietary code and in their trade secrets, which are then no longer protected, or your confidential information that goes in there is not protected anymore. Or they're relying on it, we'll go into that more, and they helpfully tell you in step 4 here that in some senses, there are sometimes use of our services may in some situations result in, I can't even read it, but basically, output that does not accurately reflect real people, places, or facts. That's attorney speak for we're wrong a lot. So going into our note takers, what could go wrong there, right? Well, the same thing, same issues about terms and conditions apply, and the same thing about confidentiality applies. You're putting something into a service, right, and it is transcribing what you're speaking when you're on a Zoom call or when you're on a Teams call or something similar. So, but there are other issues. For example, if you're on the phone with me as your attorney and you're using a note taker and it's not confidential, then that privilege may not apply to our conversation, or if you've got it saved somewhere where anyone else can access that. So it's important to know you could waive a very important legal right, to the point of legal rights you didn't know you had, right? The other thing is you could be violating laws. So some states are two-party consent states, meaning that if you're transcribing a conversation you're having with someone, say, in the state of Maryland, and you haven't let them know that there's a note taker and gotten their consent, you could be violating the law there. And certain states, for example, California, have requirements that you put a privacy notice out there anytime you take information that is personal information from a human being. And in this case, that's exactly what you would be doing. So you could be violating laws using those. So be careful when you use them, that you know what you're into. You have some examples there, Kristen, you're smiling.
Yes, I do. There was actually a former client of mine who was a Fortune 500 company, and one of the divisions that they really wanted to automate was a call center. And they had one person in particular that they were very committed to replicating as many times as they could, because they had fantastic numbers, very consistent call times. What they didn't know was under certain conditions that particular person would get very salty. And that caused a lot of behavior that the company did not know was going on. So it's very important to look at that.
Well, and you bring up a great point with those chatbots, right? So we now, when you're dealing with chatbots, often it comes up and it tells you very helpfully this is a chatbot. And you think to yourself, I kind of know that. But the reason that's telling you that is because there's actually a law that in certain circumstances you have to identify that it's a chatbot that you're working with and not a human being. But that chatbot could be salty. That chatbot could be wrong. So for example, you've heard of the situation, I'm sure, with Canada Airlines where they had a bereavement fare that the chatbot told the consumer they could have. Turned out the consumer applied for it, didn't receive it. And instead of doing the smart thing, which would have been to honor the consumer, they took it to court and they lost. So the point being, if you've got a chatbot and you're using it for your business, it better be right. And I've actually been on the phone with clients who are building a chatbot, and the very lowest person on the totem pole, you know, let's for example, I think it might be to set up times or availability for the Darden Theater. You know, the very lowest person on the chat totem pole said, well, where are you taking the data? I hope it's not our website because it's wrong. Point being, what goes in is what comes out, and so you need to know what goes in as well.
So let's move on to risks, additional risks. AI's rapid advancement has definitely introduced new cybersecurity risks. Christian, can you give us some examples of security risks that have increased due to AI?
Yeah, absolutely. There's two big ones. One of them is a still ongoing attack campaign we've all seen social engineering emails historically, but these new ones are a different breed altogether. We've seen attackers be able to dynamically scrape board of directors lists and create these entirely fabricated email exchanges of looking for a new bank, opening a new account, and it's real people, the names that you know from domains that look great, but it's completely two bots talking to each other, making up random things to try and get you to take actions that you definitely should not do. And the second one is voice impersonation. This is a conversation I've had to have with my own parents about, it only takes 2 hellos for them to get enough data on your voice to be able to replicate it. And I don't even mean like tricking the grandparents, shady service kind of calls. I mean they can bypass banks and trick your spouses for crying out loud. And that's the kind of thing where it's an entirely new threat vector that we're having to have these conversations about and set up entirely new mitigations for, which we'll get into a little later.
It's so important to mention, so even within your own family, it might make sense to have a passgrade or passcode so that if you ever get a very strange call that seems like somebody's in dire duress, a family member, you could identify whether that situation is real. And also, for our clients with wire instructions, we're used to calling to verify. We're thinking of other ways to also verify those wire instructions and sending them securely so that we don't have these horror stories.
This is so true that LMT is actually in the middle of revamping our authentication processes to get onto the cutting edge of technology for ways that our clients and our techs can verify that they're interacting with the people that they're supposed to.
So Kate, from a legal perspective, what risks do companies face when relying on data-generated answers? Can businesses safely depend on AI for guidance?
Well, I'd love to say that the answer was yes, because that would be so simple, but I think it's more nuanced. I'd like to start with, how does AI think? And the truth is we don't really know, but it's a predictor. It's a word predicting tool, and it can be programmed in various ways with various rewards to make it more creative by making it choose maybe not the most predicted next word, but the second most next predicted word. But it doesn't have a logic function. And so you can find it creating things and really bearing down on those created scenarios when its reward is to come up with something you want to hear. So you've heard about the New York lawyers who were going into court and they typed into ChatGPT that they wanted to create, an argument, and they needed some case law to bolster that argument. And so what happened? Well, ChatGPT or whatever the AI generative source they used created some great case law that really was right on point and it bolstered their views. And as it turned out, that was completely fabricated, and now we've got some real hot water because they didn't check, right? The other issue that you have is that in Google, when we Google something, we get sources. So for example, you're looking at nutritional content of pizza and you get something from the National Institute of Health, you might weigh that more heavily than Joe's House of Pizza, who says that eating pizza 4 times a day will make you strong, right? But your mind is telling you, source, I rely on that. When you use a ChatGPT source or another one of these generative AIs, you sometimes don't get that link. We encourage you, when you do get that link, to look at it and to still think to yourself, maybe that is a credible source, or it's not a credible source. So I think it's very important to think about that. And we're used to a computer being right. You're used to a calculator. You put in numbers and you get something out, and you think it's going to be better than what you would do and faster than what you would do. So we are used to, we built this relationship where we rely on computers. And there was an interesting Apple study that was done where they took a mathematical equation. And we know that without the logic function, these AI generative tools aren't necessarily particularly good at math. But when they give it a simple equation, let's say 7 pairs plus 3 pairs, Emily picked 7 and Bob picked 3, and together, they had 10. The second they introduced some data that you and I, Christian, you would think was completely irrelevant, the computer would
completely lose its ability to calculate. So if we say that, you know, I picked some apples or some pears and Christian picked some, but his were a little smaller, suddenly the whole thing fell to, you know, to pot because the AI couldn't pick out what was more important. So when you are thinking about using it, my big concern is that it's going to make an error. And that error is something that could be reputational damage for your company, or something that you relied on, or it could be something that was generated by your product, again, that created, and whether that's bias in the underlying data, or just being wrong, being programmed in a slightly different way, but that could result in a lot of harm to the consumer.
So that leads into my next question. Kate, is there AI law?
So again, there's no federal AI law, right? We can just put that there. But that being said, every law that applies in the absence of AI still applies. So I can't say, we all know you can't discriminate when you're hiring someone. I can't say, well, I didn't do it, but my AI over there did, right? And it doesn't matter whether I created the product that gave the bad result that violated the law, or, you know, it was somehow otherwise rendered a result that was inaccurate or dangerous. It doesn't matter if you buy it or you create it. You used it and you've broken the law. So that's number one. Number two, in the absence of any law, if a consumer is deceived, the Federal Trade Commission can come in under its unfair and deceptive trade practices. So in the beginning, if you remember with Facebook, there were these big judgments against Facebook for the privacy settings. And it wasn't because that was against the law, it was because that deceived consumers. And states have those rights too. They're called the unfair and deceptive practices, and every state has that ability as well. In addition to that, there are agencies that give guidance. So for example, the SEC, or can come down with enforcement action. The SEC has said, look, in the context of creating an AI product, you can't just tell someone that your AI product is going to be the best investment tool ever. That's AI washing, and that's illegal because you're going to mislead consumers. They also said, hey, you know, you can't take data that was not permissioned and use it to create an AI product. So again, that was the FTC. So agencies can come in and regulate. In addition, we have a lot of state laws that apply, and that is a really fast-changing landscape. The big one that everyone's probably heard of is the Colorado AI Act. And you're probably wondering, like, who cares? It's Colorado. I mean, we're in New York, right? But data knows no boundaries, and the second that you work with somebody in Colorado, well, guess what? It's going to apply. It applies to private businesses and public government businesses. And the reason behind it, again, it's this error thing or this bias thing. If you have a decision that's being made that's significant and important because it's maybe getting into, you know, school, education, or getting a job, or getting a credit report, or getting, getting financing, or government service, or healthcare, those are really important areas of the law where you would want to know if the machine is making a decision, and maybe there's been a bias or some reason it's produced a result that's unfair to you. You'd want to know so you could appeal it. And so this law goes to notice and transparency and making sure that individuals have a right to appeal and that an impact assessment has been done on that product so that we know that there's some way that you can have a redress. Also, there are a lot of states that have privacy laws. New York isn't one of them, but there's about 18 of them now currently effective. They're coming more and more. And a lot of those have a provision in those state laws that say something along the same lines. If you have these automated technologies, that you have the right to know about them and opt out. And so that's another thing that is just important to realize in this landscape. And then states have random laws. Tennessee has a great one called the Elvis Act that says you can't impersonate someone's voice or likeness, and you can imagine why Tennessee might have that law, right? Buy an AI product without their consent. Illinois has one in the human rights area regarding employment law. So it's very important before you buy a product or create a product that you know what these things are and you plan for it in advance.
So now that we've covered some of the risks and some of the laws, let's talk about how both of you are assisting clients. Christian, how are you helping clients with AI?
Yeah, so I've been getting this question daily for years now, and I had this conversation so many times that I actually created a process by which to guide this conversation no matter what organization you're talking about or what industry, vertical, etc. you happen to be in. And first and foremost, everything starts with looking at your data. You have to know what you have and have really high confidence in what that actually represents. You know, I had a completely different Fortune 500 company that back when we called it machine learning was trying to clean up their random dump drive that we've all had before. And by accident, they exposed 47,000 social security numbers, plus health information, addresses, tons of stuff that they just had no visibility on. So even before I get to the beginning of working with us, doing an assessment on that data, figuring out what's in there is absolutely critical. Next up, vision. Set the goal for what you want the outcome to be. I'm constantly telling my clients to dream bigger because this can go in some really cool places, and once you see sort of the full scope of what is currently capable today, you start to see things where you're like, wow, that's a thing that actually could benefit. Which brings me to the second part, which is the value side, where we start to actually run a little bit of math. How often do we actually do this particular thing? How much time is spent per iteration that we go through this? So you start to get sort of a ballpark for how much value being able to automate that or streamline this process could actually add to the business. After that, we get into the risks, where we have an idea of the big pockets of value that we want to tap into. We're starting to get some, this could actually be done with the current state of technology kind of question. But there's other risks that I spend a lot of time trying to mitigate that other people don't even look at. And legal is just one aspect, but there's hundreds of ways this can go pear-shaped, and I try to prevent that as much as I can. After that, we get to the implementation side. So it's actually finally hitting production. People are saving time using the tools. But you do need to develop and really think through ways that you're able to see how it's going. If it's starting to run askew, how do you detect that? Sometimes that's very basic stuff, like keeping an eye on Task Manager for your local system to see what's going on. But other times that's a far more advanced thing, like being able to collect customer input to have them tell you, oh, your bot swore at me. There you go. And then lastly is just the guidance piece of every company that I work with at some point got stuck on one of these, and I'm there to help guide them through it and get the wheels back on.
And so Kate, so once clients have decided to create or buy an AI product, how is legal involved and how do you advise them?
Well, I think with any product, right, with that legal landscape, we want to make sure that it's compliant and safe. So if you're buying a legal product or an AI product, you want to do a due diligence to determine, is it biased? Has anybody looked into it? Is it possible it's going to give wrong results? If you're putting your data into it, is it confidential? Do you have the legal terms and conditions that state that it is confidential? So can we back that up? Can we actually enforce that? So I think when you're buying a product, that's one area we look at. When you're creating a product, we want to create it with the end in mind. So if we know that a user has to be able to opt out because it's an important area where it could have a significant legal effect, then we'll design that opt-out right into the process. And if, say, for example, you're buying an AI company, in that mergers and acquisitions transaction, we do a lot of diligence, and we say, okay, that model you're about to spend millions on, is there a chance that you would have to disgorge that because the data that was used to create the model was done in a manner that wasn't properly consented to and permission? And we've actually had deals where we've had to pull the cord because the risk was too great. So again, it's very important to understand what's the application and how do we get to that point, because otherwise it can be very expensive later when you put a product out on the market and you haven't thought it through at the beginning. So we think about how the product is built, we design for it to be compliant with laws, we design proper consent notices, we design the proper policies that go with it, and we make sure that the contract terms follow all of that. So it's a lot of steps, but coming to us early in the process really saves a lot of money in the long term.
So speaking of policies, we briefly touched on the importance of an AI governance policy. Kate, Christian, what is an AI governance policy, and does every company need one?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, absolutely. Every company needs to have one. It's the same reason we have any other policy. At some point, you have to actually tell your people, you can do this, you can't do this. If you're not sure, here's how to find out, and these are the consequences if you violate it.
So I think it's an excellent opportunity to realize that this is not one size fits all. So when you're looking at it, the first thing to do is inventory how people are using AI in your business. And that might be even just asking employees, are you using ChatGPT? Are you using AI note takers? Looking at that whole spectrum of what you have, and then thinking about whether or not that's appropriate to the type of business you have. For example, if you're in national security, it might not be such a good idea to put those secrets, right, out there, say on the Signal app. Just wondering, or frankly, into ChatGPT. So I think it's important to be aware first and understand it and decide what is a go and what's a no-go. Be very clear about that. In certain industries like mine, that's very important with the attorney-client privilege, right? So once we've made that determination, we've written it down, we've made sure that's a policy that everybody can comply with, now we also have a way to make it accountable for the company. Because if something goes wrong, unfortunately, you can't take something back out of the chatbot you put in. But you do have a policy to deal with a person who hasn't complied with the policy, right? And that's important.
Great, well, we've covered a lot of information here, and I'd love to get your feedback on some takeaways that everyone here in the audience could take back to their business tomorrow. So Kate, what are your takeaways?
Well, the first is don't assume that your AI product, even if you're paying money for it, is safe or legal, right? So I think it's really important to think carefully about every product that you use in that lens. And then secondly, I think thinking about an AI governance policy for your company is really important because that makes you think about the applicable uses and what might be reasonable versus not reasonable. It's so helpful. We want people to use it. We just want them to use it safely and to think about it.
And I think for me, there's two key takeaways. The first one is exactly like in law, ignorance is not a defense. Choosing to never look, turn a blind eye, that does not help you. Secondly, my goal for everyone is to be able to make a risk-informed decision. So I'm not saying don't use bots or AI integrated into different processes. What I am saying is take a look beforehand, understand the actual risks you're taking before you expose yourself to them.
Great, well, thank you all for your time today. Hopefully this was informative and helpful for everyone that's out here. So please feel free to ask us questions after the event. We don't have time for Q&A, but I would like to have Alan Buell come up and he's going to give us the next steps. He's going to give us information on the museum and, more importantly, how to get to the bar.
Yes. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. When I know it's between me and you and a drink, I like to go quick. So again, quickly, I just want to say on behalf of the Board of Trustees and the staff, it's our pleasure to welcome you here to the Eastman Museum. If you have not been here, make sure you at least go up and enjoy the mansion tonight. It's Rochester's jewel, and it is open for you to enjoy and look around. You're going to join me out these two doors. If you turn to the left, that's the excitement, that's where the bar and the food is. If you turn to the right, you will head up into the Eastman Mansion. Just a quick little bit of information. It's the biggest house It's the largest property and the biggest house in the city of Rochester. It sits on 12.5 acres, and the mansion is 35,000 square feet, designed for one guy, and he lived here until his death in 1932. So again, I don't want to drag you out with all the information, but I'm here with you tonight. If you'd like any information, I'm happy to answer questions and show you anything about the mansion that you would like to know. So on that note, I just want you to have a good time and enjoy the museum, and please join me.